So hi, I'm Kit Needham, Director of Project Olympus, which is a startup incubator for CMU and Assistant Dean for Entrepreneurship Initiatives. And we help CMU, any company's got a CMU affiliation, undergrad, master's, PhDs, faculty, staff, increasingly alumni, explore the commercial potential of their idea, try to find product market fit and a feasible business model. So we have been doing this series of Start Smart presentations for it's over 10 years, I believe. So I'd like to introduce my partners in crime. So I'll start with Stephanie.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Dangle. I'm a professor of practice at Pitt Law School, and I teach courses related to commercializing technologies. And many years ago, I practiced with David Lehman at K&L Gates. And I'm going to hand it over to Ryan to introduce yourself, my Pitt colleague tonight.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Skelton, and I'm an administrator down at the Big Idea Center. We're Pitt's Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. And I'm just happy to be here. I'm here to anchor and record and make sure all the trains are running on time. So pay me no mind. Right? I don't know who you want to go next.
So you can see that this is being recorded. The presentation that David's going to be using is up on the Big Idea Center, I think on your website. It's also on our Schwartz Center, what they call workshop archives. So both will be available there. And I don't think I have anybody else that's from either of our organizations. So I'm going to turn it over to our, I guess it's the fourth in this.
No asking about the your favorite question.
Oh, thank you. So he knows my job better than I do. But this is part of the Connects series that happens to be on legal matters too. But one of the reasons why we call it Connects is it gives people an opportunity to do a shout out for if they're looking for a teammate, they're looking to join a team, they have a question, opportunity, or need some help with something. This is your chance. And I will just say startups cannot be shy. You got to learn to sort of put it out there. The only thing I ask is that you be brief. So say your name, say what you're looking for, and then say your name again. Do I have to volunteer somebody?
I'm happy to talk. This is Maureen Phoebe. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually an employee at CMU, and I'm just looking, I'm not exactly sure if I'm looking to connect or for a teammate. Well, I'm sorry, to be a teammate or for a teammate. I really am just looking to see what is needed to do a startup and gain some kind of foundation and take it from there. So I'm very much a novice, if you will.
Okay, well, you're starting sort of in the middle here, which is looking for funding, but as again,
Okay.
it's the CMU staff. If you have an idea for startup, just find me. I'm
Okay.
at cmu.edu. So
Gotcha.
letters and follow up with me afterwards.
Thank you.
So I saw somebody else had their hand up, but then the screen flipped.
Hey, yeah, that was me. I'm Nolan Sulpizio. I have some CMU affiliation through my teammates and stuff, but I'm actually a Duquesne student. I have a tech startup right now that we started through Techstar Startup Weekend. Clean Plate, it's a smart camera data aggregation system for food waste prevention and operational cost savings. I'm currently looking for teammates. I'm based out of the Oakland office in Avenue Workspace on Myron. So yeah, I'm looking for teammates for the tech side mainly. And then some other strategic and financial side stuff too. So reach out.
Okay, so Steve, just to say, put your contact information in chat. So if somebody has something, and what I tell all of our startups in there is to go to Handshake. I tell startups to put in if they're looking for help, but I also sometimes have students who actually put themselves in there so that people can find them. It is free to use, and both Pitt and CMU both use Handshake. I'm not sure whether Duquesne does or not.
I also want to make a shout out for teammates.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Aditi. I am a PhD student at CMU, and my startup makes systems like trains and robots safer by putting guardrails on their operations. Yeah, I'm looking for teammates. We're still in the customer discovery phase. Yeah, Aditi, reach out to me.
Okay, so Aditi, put your contact information in the chat so people can follow up. And the same advice that I gave Steve applies to you.
Hi, my name's Lisa Scolanti. I am involved in Vital, which is a medical software startup. And I just finished like a pre-seed raise, and I need to learn how to advance forward, how to do better capital raise.
Well, you come to the right place. So, we'll get you started on that. And who else? Okay. Oh, wow. David, thank you for reminding me. I didn't know we had this pen up. So James, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'm James Stokes in Pittsburgh. I'm not a PhD. I'm a graduate of a long time ago, so you can tell by the great hair. But I've looking for teammates. Recently submitted a bid into the robotics factory. We're looking to build a solution to grade standing timber. We call it grading timber. The industry knowledge is leaving the workplace, and it's a perfect time to gather that knowledge into an AI system. So we want to we're looking for optics and sensors, LiDAR, good optics. We're going to GIS map, like someone has a 100-acre plot. We're going to fly the drone through, assess them, tell you how much you have in the bank, what species of tree it is, what it may be worth in 5 years. Even monitor it. We're looking to partner with some forest prevention. There's solar that connect through satellites saying, hey, I smell smoke. Get the forest fire out here. It's really rapidly going. So I'm looking for people to help with the sensors, trying to figure out which drones can carry the payload and maybe defend itself against an owl. I'm not sure. What may happen in the wilds out there, and also weather and things like that. So I'm looking for technical teammates to help me find a solution.
Did you say you're in the robot factory?
I put a bid into the accelerator, or it's not been awarded yet, but I was at the expo last night and probably not going to get it. I'm still like at the idea stage, so I'm moving it forward.
Okay. Well, the same thing I would just say to you is just write up just a brief sort of what I call the job description and post it in Handshake. So the only thing I will tell you, when you register, you can't register with a Gmail. So use something else.
Well, I have a domain for it, so I'm fine with that.
You should use that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And this is not the only time we do this. Assuming somebody reminds you, each connects, right, where this takes place. So it might take a couple hits because sometimes it's not the person's on there too, but they know somebody, and we'll follow up with your contact information. So again, put your contact info in the chat. Anybody else? Hey, we're hitting pay dirt here. Okay, Kevin, go.
Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Dye. I'm a postdoc researcher at CMU. I'm working to reduce surgical training times and cost by up to 10 times through advanced 3D printing materials and medical training models. So I'm looking for technical teammates who might be interested in contributing on polymer development. So looking for anyone who has experience with polymer chemistry, and I'll put my contact info into chat. Thanks.
Cool.
Hi, everyone. I'm DK, a recent graduate, a master's student at the University of Pittsburgh. I have actually 2 different projects that I'm working on that I might need some teammates for. One of the projects, I'm collaborating with an ENT surgeon at Children's in Pittsburgh, and we're trying to develop a smart cautery that will automatically turn on and off whether it's in a safe zone or a non-safe zone. We already have a provisional patent on this, but we just want to develop a MVP for this. So I'm kind of potentially looking for teammates in the technical side to kind of help us look at sensors. And the other project is a software digital health platform to kind of help caretakers manage children with complicated disorders. And I kind of need some teammates to help with setting up like preclinical studies, as well as just helping me with my software. But I can put that information as well.
Okay, wow. All right. Anybody else?
Sure. Hi, I am Vasha. It's great to meet all of y'all here. So I am working on a platform to help individuals with food allergies navigate grocery stores better. So we're trying to make that entire process of going through the grocery store, reading labels, and finding food that is safe for individuals with food allergies into a more efficient process. And right now, we are kind of in that stage where we're both doing customer discovery, but at the same time trying to build our MVP and trying to test it out with users. So we are trying to expand our team as well. So if anyone is interested in solving this problem, please reach out. We are trying to look for developers at this moment to help develop the platform, but feel free to hit me up. I will be leaving my email in the chat below. And yeah, and I forgot to mention this, I am a CMU alumni.
Okay. Well, Varsha, you're also looking for people to interview that either have allergies or have children who have allergies. This is part of the customer discovery. So if you're willing to be interviewed or you know somebody, put your information into the chat for Varsha. So
yes, please do that. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Kit. Appreciate it.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
I am. So think of this as part 1, and part 2 will be on Tuesday evening.
Can everybody see this?
Yes. Now we
Cool.
can see the
All right,
All
just say next slide,
Great,
please.
thank you.
Thank
This
you. Thanks,
works,
Ryan.
yeah.
I appreciate it. Okay.
Give me the cue.
Let's test it. Next slide. Cool. Next slide. Cool. Thank you. So, and so what we're going to do is, I've just did the introductions. I'll do some alternative challenges and alternatives to raising capital. I'm going to talk a little bit about applicable laws, particularly securities laws. I promise I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but I want to sensitize you to it. And we're going to talk about raising capital security you use, whether it's debt, stock, convertible debt, a safe. We'll spend the most time today on that because I think it's really important that folks understand the kind of security that you're going to, and the importance of the difference between common stock and the convertible debt and safes, all of which are the kinds of things that you will issue when you raise capital. So I think it's important at least you understand those things. They actually, it turns out they have economic consequences to you, and it's really important to do that. We'll talk about some commonly discussed terms like board membership and investor rights and all that good stuff. I'll talk about top 10 or so because I can never keep track of pitfalls. And then you'll see in the at the end there it says questions and answers, but don't wait. And I really mean that, which is if you have things you want to talk about, please interrupt me, put it in the chat, and then hopefully somebody will. I won't be monitoring the chat, but somebody will interrupt me, and we'll talk about whatever else is on your mind. Cool. So let me go from there. And the first thing I just want to point out is when we raise capital and you're issuing stock, it's important to remember that you're balancing what I call balancing competing interests. You're the founder, obviously, or at least maybe you are, but you're the founder, and so the founder sure as heck got to get some equity and value for both the work they've done and going forward, right? And that's really important. And indeed, we're going to hire new people, management, employees, et cetera. So we create option pools. So you got to make sure you have enough for them. We certainly want to motivate and give people equity for ideas and innovations and those kinds of things. For example, if a license from a university, they get some equity for it. Otherwise, we have licensing in technology, et cetera. So there's equity need for that. Old capital and importantly, new capital. New money is going to come in, so it's going to dilute the others. All of this is a way of saying is when we take in additional money and you're allocating equity to people, it's really important to think about the big picture and make sure we have enough equity to incent the people that are going to need it. If I were to, I'll skip to the end where I talk about one of the worst mistakes, and I will say one of the mistakes I see people most often make is giving too much equity to people who no longer are contributing or not contributing to the company going forward, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of negotiation, and that's a problem later. So we want to make sure we allocate correctly. So I think there might have been a question in the chat room. I think I saw it, but maybe let me see what it was, or did somebody want to tell me what it was?
I think you're going to get to this, but for pre-seed, should you spend the time and money on registering for the proper LLC or wait until you start your first seed round?
to register the LLC? In other words, you want to form the entity, the LLC or the corporation, as soon as possible, and certainly before you do your pre-seed round, because you'll need the entity to do that, if that answers the question.
So the only thing I will just say is just careful if you're an F1 student. There are some
Yes.
conditions under that, and you should talk to somebody first.
Correct. On the immigration side, absolutely. Next slide, please. We spend a huge amount of time talking about raising capital in the form of issuing debt and equity and all those. And I do suggest to clients and friends that they step back and say, okay, that's good, but there are other ways to raise capital and get my business going. For example, some people, well now, who's largely getting customers to pay for the development in exchange for lower costs going forward. They help them with the customer discovery. They help them with their ideas. They're going to give them, so one is customers doing tests and pilots. Bootstrapping, I mean, if you can keep the cost down and start revenue early, that's helpful. License fees, there's another one. Public financing, grants, SBIRs, which there's lots of presentations about SBIRs, but you know, they have their own limitations regarding U.S. citizenship and ownership and all kinds of things. But the point is to consider it as an alternative because you know, again, you're not giving up ownership. Straight debt is a possibility. Straight debt from a bank, of course, that often comes with the requirement for collateral. So sometimes we'll have that opportunity, but that's something possible.
Sorry, excuse me. You're good.
And I see a question about SBIR. SBIR is a type of a government grant that you can get for a small business something. What the acronym is for, but it's a government grant that you can get for research.
And you get it from one of the agencies like NSF, NIH, DOD.
Correct.
Whatever.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. And another opportunity is crowdfunding, which we won't spend a lot of time on, but that's another way to think about it. So, all right, moving on. Next slide, please. So, you know, when we think about raising capital, there's all kinds of sort of the beginning stage, the end stage. You can go to incubators and accelerators around town. There's public funds. There's friends and family round. There's angels and angels. People use the term, and it's a fairly loose term, but it typically means sort of fairly wealthy individuals who enjoy, you know, taking the risk and investing in these types of early stage companies. Sometimes they're in a network, sometimes they're individuals. And there's some that will do in the very early stage, and there's some that would require later stage companies. Then a little further down the line, there's venture capital funds, which are basically, you know, they're funds that are put together with either also wealthy individuals or funds or pension plans and those kinds of things that invest in companies. And then they also will sometimes do early stage, some will do later stage, and finally public money, public going public, getting public funds. Okay, so that's the whole cycle of potential investors. If you think about it, we're sort of focusing, I'll call it, on the friends and family round and the early stage rounds, so angels and venture capital. Those are more the sort of the way we're thinking about it. Although I will say that the convertible debt that we're looking at and the SAFE, which I'll describe in a little bit further, are the kinds of vehicles that, for example, the LifeX and others use, and Innovation Works, actually. Okay. All right. Next slide. So I promised I wouldn't drone on and on about this, but I will. So I want to spend a few minutes on the Securities Act of 1933 because I didn't read anything after that. And basically, what the short version of that is that anytime you sell a security, you have to register that security with the Securities and Exchange Commission unless you have an exemption. a security for this purpose, you see the definition on the slide. I won't read it to you, but it is a very broad definition. Stock, common stock, convertible debt, safe notes, they are all securities. And so short of an exemption, one would actually have to do a full-blown registration statement with the SEC and go through that whole process, which nobody can afford to do because it costs millions of dollars. So your job is to avoid registration by getting an exemption. Could you go to the next slide, please? Next slide, I think. We will talk about the private offering exemption, 506 and 50D in a moment. And it is an exemption from the registration process. If you have qualified for this, you don't have to register. That's good. There is a notice filing, so you have to make a notice with the SEC, and it doesn't protect you from some frauds. You can't defraud people, but you do, and you do have to file a Form D with the SEC within 15 days after the sale of the first security. So, but it's a notice filing. It's a pretty easy notice to do, but it's important to do it. Go on to the next slide, please. The typical exemption for the securities exemption that we use for growth companies, startup companies, is under what's called Rule 506B, which is no reason you would want to remember it. But it's important to know that some of their criteria are you can have a unlimited number of accredited investors, and we're going to talk about the definition of accredited investors, and up to 35 who are not accredited investors. But actually, as a practical matter, we never use that one because for unaccredited investors under 506, you got to give them all kinds of detailed information, including financial statements that nobody ever has. So you should think about unlimited number of accredited investors, and you have to have a reasonable belief that they are accredited investors. Let's go to the next slide, please. An accredited investor for this purpose is somebody who has a net worth of at least $1 million or has earned in the last 2 years, if it's individual, $200,000, married $300,000, and expect to have the same in the upcoming year. In addition, nonprofits are exempt, and corporations who have at least $5 million are exempt. Also, directors, executive officers, general partners. So, for example, if you're the founder, you would be an accredited investor. So, unlimited number of accredited investors, next slide, please. And under 506B, you have to have, this is really important under this exemption, there can't be a general solicitation or general advertising. Really important point, which is to say, if you're raising capital, thou shalt not put on your website, I'm looking to raise capital. There's no putting in the paper, I'm looking for money. And does this apply to friends and families around as well? The answer is yes, it does. When you issue security to friends and family, that is very much issuing a security, and we've got to comply with these rules. Yes. One of the other two other requirements for this is, one is you need to have a reasonable belief that the buyer is purchasing for purpose of investment and not resale. So they can't be basically an underwriter. So you get a representation to that effect. And I did mention earlier that you have to file a Form D with the SEC. It's pretty straightforward. Next slide. There's, as of a number of years ago, not to know anymore, but there's now a 506C. The 6C, so there's a question regarding individuals who I consider to be micro investors. So tell me what you mean by a micro investor. Let me pause there. Tell me one more about what you mean there. So $250 to $500 yes. Actually, they are. If we're issuing stock to people, even micro investors, we're still in the world of securities. As bizarre as it is. Right?
I have a quick question.
Can I? Am I allowed to speak or just chat? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go speak, please.
Yeah. So just what if you go back to the previous slide, like what if they don't meet any of those requirements?
Yeah. So if you don't, then we're going to have to do one of two things. We're either going to have to comply with 506, have up to 35 unaccredited investors and give them the financial information they need. right? Either do that, or that's probably the only other choice.
So I have a question as well, with the previous slide. So if your business trying to, you know, get funding from customers, that's what you described earlier, that you can try to get, I guess, funding from customers, how would that not be soliciting, I guess, in a way?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And so when I talk about getting money from customers, there's really, what I'm thinking about when I get money from customers is a down payment, not in exchange for security, but essentially for the service or product. So they're prepaying for the service or product, or they're getting or they're doing a beta test or something like that. So I'm not selling them a security. I'm actually selling a product or service. That's that. Now, having said that, an alternative would be, so that's what I was thinking about when I talked about that. If you want to have what's called a strategic investor, which is have a customer invest in your company, you can do that. That's fine. They will also, that will be an offering of securities, and we need to comply with these requirements for them as well, which is to say they have to be either an accredited investor or one of 35 unaccredited investors in the round.
I see.
Mark, you look confused. You good?
No,
Answer your question?
thank you for that clarification. Yeah, I thank you for the clarification. I just know that the initial investment round that I'd be looking for would be these micro investments from young people with net worths and incomes much lower than the threshold for an accredited investor.
That way of raising capital among them and offering them securities is problematic from a securities perspective.
But unaccredited means it would just be gathering their financial statements, which might not be as complex as someone else's financial statements.
Well, it's actually less about, again, their financial statements than you issuing a financial statement of the company. So we'll have to, and so, but you may be able to pull it off if you're brand new. You might be able to pull it off.
Right.
So David, what would happen if, your mom and dad wanted to help you out, and they gave the money to Mark?
Yeah.
And so then Mark, then as a founder, can put it into the business. Is that
sure? So if Mark wants to do that, that's fine. Which is, if Mark borrows the money from mom and dad, and we do this all the time, and then he invests it, that's fine. I mean, that's between he and his mom and dad on how and when he repays that money to mom and dad. But if mom and dad aren't accredited investors and they actually don't care about investing it, they just want to give you something to do it, that's fine. We do that all the time. Yeah.
Isn't the main problem, you don't want to take money from somebody who you're taking their retirement or their livelihood?
Lisa, that is the reason for this. That is the reason for this. Exactly. I mean, you'll see later, but I'll say now. I call it the Thanksgiving dinner. You don't want to take people who can't afford it, because no matter how you twist and turn, it's a risky investment. And you want to take it from family who, when you go to family Thanksgiving dinner, you want to be able to, if they lost their money, you want to be able to still have nice turkey and not be mad at each other, And I could tell you a story about a brother-in-law who didn't adhere to that role, and I would just say that dinners are difficult. So, Kit, you're on mute if you're talking.
I was just going to say we could talk about it over martinis, but
yes, exactly. Yes. All right. So we'll move on from that one. Okay, cool. So that's that piece. But I do want to talk about 506C for a second, because that one actually you can advertise, interestingly. But all the purchasers must be accredited investors, and it's more than just taking reasonable steps. You actually have to make sure they're accredited investors. You got to look at their tax returns or do something extra to make sure that they're truly accredited investors. So if you're going to rely on this exemption and only deal with accredited investors and really go through the extra step, then you can actually go advertise, which is kind of cool. That's relatively new. All right, you want to go to the next slide, please? So heightened verification. Go to the next one. I sort of made that point already.
When you join like an accelerator, and they show you like a portfolio of investors, can we assume that they've already kind of dealt with whether they're accredited or not, I guess, and we're just having access to them?
Good question. If you, I would look at it a different way, which is if they give you to people, I don't view that as a general solicitation because I think that they're already essentially pre-qualified. If you actually make the investment, if they actually do invest, then you will have to get verification from them directly that they're accredited investors, and you can't rely on the people that introduced you.
Okay.
Good questions. Let me make one more comment about securities regulation, which is that there's also state regulation. And so not only do you need to comply with federal, but you also comply with the state. And the state, what I mean by the state is the state in which you make an offer or sale of a security. So and what counts here is where the investor is. So if Kit invests in my company and she's in California, then I have to file in California and comply with the California securities law. As a general matter, if you comply with the Rule Reg D that I was just describing, it's fairly straightforward. You just file a state Reg D, but you got to file there. So that's good. But that's just so don't forget about the state. Some people don't. And they actually take I think an aggressive view that the federal preempted it, but I think that's an aggressive view, and I recommend to people that they file in the states as well. Next slide, please. All right, so the bottom line is rely on 506 B or C. Decide whether you're going to do 506 B or C early, because if you're not going to advertise, then you really have to make sure. If you're going to advertise, you have to make sure that you only have accredited investors. All right, next slide, please. So some people say, who cares? I mean, to the point, I'm taking $250. I'm taking a few $1,000s from people. Who cares? And so why do I comply? And we're pretty comfortable that the Securities and Exchange Commission is not going to come knocking at your door, and put you in jail for this, right? So it's a practical matter. Why worry about this? And I'll give you 3 reasons for that. One is if you don't comply, your investors actually have a right to seek rescission. They actually have, the remedy is, among others, that they have a right to ask you to return the money, and they actually have a right to get the money back anytime they want if you didn't comply. That's point 1. Point 2 is which they will never do unless the deal doesn't do well. So there's that point. The second point is that, and probably the most as a practical matter, when you go to raise your Series A, the next round, or you go to sell the company, there's going to be people are going to look to see, did you comply? Because they don't want the risk of somebody making a claim against you for having not complied. And so you'll see the little angel and devil on Homer's shoulders, and you can decide which is which, what's a potential investor or acquirer. I don't care who your view is. But the point is, with an eye toward them, you want to be able to, when they do diligence, either the investor or the purchaser, you want to be able to show that I complied, here it is, and just check that off the box. Many a deal has had troubles because people can't show that. So for that reason, I think I would do it. The third reason is it's insurance policy. Since you do this, then people can't come back at you. So it's worth doing it. Next slide, please. I do want to make one point about disclosure to investors. And sometimes you do a whole private placement memorandum, and you can do that. And if you're not raising a lot of money, that's very expensive. But I do want to make sure that you think about what you're giving investors and you've given them adequate disclosure. And that can be as far as a business plan, hopefully some risk factors, make sure they understand, for example, what compensation arrangements you have. But you want to make sure that we have properly disclosed to the investors what the money is being used for and the risks associated with it. So that's an important thing to keep in mind.
So just to give a practical example, not too long ago, maybe 2 years ago, if you remember Blue Apron, which is one of the home delivery services, they had a massive lawsuit from a number of their investors because they did not adequately disclose some of the risks and it turned out the company was facing at that time, which jeopardized the investment. So it does happen.
Oh yeah, it does. And you know, and it's a, I understand totally that's a balance of how much, you know, how much money you're raising and putting together, you know, a full-blown product prospectus. I mean, you can afford that. So what sometimes I do as a practical matter is, you know, people will do a business plan, and then I'll suggest to them that we attach to it risk factors, trying to list all the things that can go wrong. And here's the ironic part about this. This is really funny, at least for a lawyer perspective. The longer the list, the list of the risk factors, you get done with it, you look at it and you say, oh my God, who would possibly invest in this thing because of all these risks, and you show them all these things. Well, the funny part is the longer the list of risk factors, the better protected you are and the less likely the investor is actually to read it carefully. So, so the more there is, the better off you are. And so it's really, it's you know, it's really good to be able to say that. And frankly, it's a good thing to have a discussion with the investor. Here are the risks. Here's how we're addressing the risk. It's still a risk, but we're trying to mitigate the risk as follows. So, you know, yes, for example, it is possible that there'll be lots of regulations, but here's how we're addressing the regulations. And frankly, by addressing the regulations, we actually have a competitive advantage because we've gotten all the licenses and our competitors have, right? All those kinds of things. So you can turn the risk into a positive spun the right way. Next slide. We already talked about that. Next slide. All right. That's it on securities compliance. We'll pause there and take a breath and see if anybody has anything. Take a swing. This is water, by the way. Okay.
No olives. How you take
No, yeah, you can tell. All right. Now let's talk about the type of security that you would give to investors along the way. And this chart sort of describes, I'll call it the hierarchy of investment. At the very bottom is common equity. That's common stock. You as founders have common stock in the company, right? That's if people are to go bankrupt and you're going to bankruptcy and the place was liquidated, they would get the last dollar on the table, right? That's common equity. At the very top of the list is debt. Debt is a creditor. They are entitled to, you know, that you owe the money. You got to pay the money. So that's the highest level of security. And secured debt means that you've got a security interest. It's like if you borrow money, if you borrow to buy a house and you give people, you give the lender a mortgage. That's the security the house if you pledge security. So that's secured debt. That's the most secured, obviously, by definition, of the potential security you give to people. So at the top is debt, the bottom is equity. From the bottom up is preferred equity, and that gets a preference. So as between the preferred equity and common equity, preferred equity would get a preference for the investment. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to preferred equity. I'm going to describe that a little bit more. And then convertible debt is debt that you give to people, which then can convert into equity. So they invest as debt, they get convertible debt, but it gets converted into equity under certain circumstances. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So I'm going to go through that. Okay. All right. Next slide, please. Issuing. I just did that. Next slide. We just went through that. Debt is kind of, you know, that's kind of easy. If somebody comes in and take your friends and family and they just lend to a company, you know, $25,000 and said, here's a note. The good news is they hand you the check, you hand them a note. The company owes them $25,000 plus interest, and it's kind of nice. Doesn't have any. It's not dilutive. I just owe the $25,000. I'd have to give up a percentage of the company, so that's kind of nice from the company's perspective. You know, I didn't have to get into the whole issue of how much stock did I get and what's the value of the company. So it's kind of easy. The bad news is the one that's in red. I got to pay it back. I perish the thought. The company actually owes the money and has interest. And this has balance sheet implications. So it's true debt. And so oftentimes people, and you know, go to the next slide, please. And from an investor's perspective, the good news is it's got a preference. The bad news is there's no real upside. I mean, if somebody puts $25,000 into your startup company and it's got lots of, the idea is there's going to be lots of reward in exchange for that risk. And a simple interest isn't sufficient typically to compensate people for the risk associated with a startup company. In addition, sometimes people, if you're going to give people, if their startup company's going to borrow money, they want security for it. They want, and perhaps even a personal guarantee. And if you're a founder, you sure as heck don't want to sign a personal guarantee to pay back the money. I want to repeat that. You, as the founder of the company, not want to sign a personal guarantee with respect to the returning money from the company. It's one thing for you to put your sweat, tears, and time and effort, and maybe there's some capital on it, but you sure as heck don't want to pay the debt. And by the way, the structure we talked about a few moments ago, if it's not friends and family and that arrangement, you're sort of back-ending into that, isn't it? If Stephanie borrows money from her dad, $25,000, and then puts it into the company, and the company goes belly up, Stephanie owes dad $25,000. Now, maybe dad will forgive the debt, maybe dad won't, but that's debt. So that's another way to borrow money that, it's still debt. So I typically don't see straight debt into startup companies. Just for the reasons I mentioned, doesn't give the investor the kind of upside and doesn't really give the security. And it's not really great to attract additional investments. So while I sometimes see it, it's kind of rare. So let's move on. Next slide, please. And we already talked about this. Next slide, please. Another thing is to give friends and family, in particular, common stock. And that's kind of nice. So I want to spend a moment on that. The nice thing is, if somebody gives me $25,000 and I say, okay, in exchange for $25,000, I'm going to give you 1% of the stock. Cool, done. It's actually elegantly simple. It aligns our interest. When I make money, they make money. We're 100% aligned. There's no preference or anything else. It's really easy. It's elegant. And so as an investor, so as a company, I kind of like that. And frankly, for the friends and family around, sometimes it's done this way. It does require evaluation. So you got to figure out how much stock I'm going to give them. So that means I need to value the company, right? How much stock we're going to give them. And because it's not a preferred stock, sometimes it's a slightly lower valuation because they're not getting the preference and some of the benefits that I'm going to talk about with preferred stock. So sometimes if you give only common stock, they got to give up a little bit more of the company because you're not giving the investor quite as many benefits as you will. So it's elegant, aligns interest, but sometimes it's not as attractive for the investor side. And so move on to the next slide, please.
So David, how do you get that valuation?
What's that?
How do you get, it doesn't happen often, but how would you decide what the company is worth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's the question. And we're going to get into that. That question is the same question on if you issue just straight preferred stock. You're going to have to value the company because you got to figure out how much stock they've given, right? So that question is inherent in any time you issue the stock. So the question is, what is that value? And it is totally negotiated, between the parties. The way to think about it is to think about how much you can afford to give. And so the balance is this, and I don't want to. So let me balance. The balance is I want to make sure that I keep enough investment, enough equity in the founder, so they will and the company in order to motivate the investor, the company, and to attract additional capital. On the other hand, I got to give enough equity to the investor that they're going to get a decent return on their investment. And so, for example, if they put $25,000 in, they get 1% of the stock, and then we're going to take a whole bunch more rounds. That 1% is going to become de minimis, right? It's going to become just a teeny percentage at the end of the day. So you got to look to see what people are doing. If you told me in the first, I'll give you, if you told me in the first round that you were giving more than 5% of the company for, a $250,000, I would worry about that a little bit. That would just give you something, if I were to put some numbers on this, right? mean, I just worry about giving up too much equity or not enough money. So that's the balance. Cool.
How does a company like a startup, especially if they're like in the pre-seed period, how can they define the value?
Yeah. So let me great question. Great question. And so the way I get around that is not to use this at all. This is the principal reason we do convertible debt or safes, because you actually don't have to do the valuation. I mean, that's the truth is that's the principal reason I'm doing it. So, and we're going to talk about that in 2 seconds. So, because you're absolutely right. I mean, if you can talk to people and they can say, the norm is X number of dollars and the norm is this, and et cetera. But that's the reason on the pre-seed, we tend to use convertible debt, or one of the reasons we tend to use convertible debt or safes, because you don't have to value the company today. So that's sort of the reason. So let me. So I didn't mean to duck it, but that's the principal reason. Let me go on to preferred equity for a moment. I just want to touch on it. Actually, I'll do more than touch on it. And then I want to get to convertible debt and safes, which is the principal likely security you're going to do in the first instance. Let me talk about. Go to the next slide, please. Preferred equity, because we talked about common. Preferred equity, which is what VCs get, and sometimes angels get, but typically it's equity, but it gets a preference, otherwise known as preferred stock. That's why. And what that means is, if somebody invests money, they get a preference. When the company is sold, they get their money out first. And we're going to talk about participating in preferred versus non-participating in a preferred in a moment. It also accrues a dividend. Now, it's not your Disney, I call it the Disney type dividend, which, because when I was a kid, I got Disney stock, and every quarter I would get a little check with Mickey Mouse on it. It's not that. It accrues the dividend. It's called 6-8%, whatever it is, and that when it converts into equity, when it converts to common stock, will additionally dilute you. So think about dilution as opposed to money. But anyways, accrue the dividend. Investors kind of like this because they like the liquidation preference and they like the dividend. It's a little more complicated. We still got to do a value because we have to figure out how much stock to give people. Go on to the next slide, if you would. Let me talk about, I mentioned participating versus non-participating preferred, and it's important, and I just want to make sure you at least understand the issue and you're sensitive to it. Participating preferred means that the investor gets, if there were a sale of the company, the investor gets their money plus dividends and participation on a pro rata basis. I'm going to do an example in a moment. That's participating preferred. So if we sell the company, the investor, if they put $1 million in, gets $1 million back plus a dividend, and then they get their pro rata share. So if they got 20% of the company and they put $1 million in, they get $1 million and 20% of the proceeds thereafter. Non-participating preferred, and so what that does is, the reason for that is that's giving them both downside protection and it's enhancing their return, right? As you can see, because they're getting the money plus a percentage. Non-participating preferred is the investor receives the greater of their investment plus accrued dividends or the amount that they would get on a pro rata basis. So in my example, they're either getting $1 million or 20% of the sale price, whichever's higher. That's purely downside protection. That's saying that if we sell the company, they're going to get the first, their investment out first plus the dividend. Go to the next slide, if you would. So let me give you an example to put numbers on. Assume the investors put a $2 million investment in, and there's a $3 million pre-money valuation, that's just a fancy way of saying that the investors are getting 40% of the company. Okay, so they put $2 million in, and they're getting 40% of the company. You may remember that I said participating preferred means they get their money back plus their pro rata share. So in my example one under participating, you'll see that if we sell the company for $5 million, the investor would get $3.2 million. That's the in red, and that's because they got the $2 million back, plus 40% of the remaining $3 million. If we sell it for five minus the $2 million they got back is 3, so they got 40% of the 3 plus the $2 million. They got $3.2 million. Now let me talk about the non-participating for the same example. If we sold for $5 million, they put $2 million in, and they got 40% of the company. They get the greater of. We sell it for $5 million. They get the greater of $2 million or 40% of the $5 million, which is $2 million. They got $2 million. What a difference! Of the $5 million, they got $2 million versus $3.2 million, or for the founders, got $3 million versus $1.8 million.
But why would I do that?
Because it's the only deal you could get. That's what you negotiated.
I really don't like that deal.
Well, I know you don't. I get that. And sometimes you cap it. So there's ways to negotiate it, right? You can cap it. You can say over a certain amount and they'll get that additional return. I mean, there's ways to negotiate it. And the real way to do it is make sure you have different people, different investors. So you have negotiating room. So you're not only negotiating with one investor. So you put yourself in a position where you don't have to do that deal. But the reason I raise it is because it's important to understand this. Because when you're looking at these term sheets, it seems like gobbledygook, but this has real economic meaning to the company. That's the point. Okay. All right. Moving on. Next slide, please. All right. So we talked about common stock. We talked about debt. We talked about preferred stock. Now let me talk about convertible debt. And convertible debt's probably the most common for where you guys are. And what that says is I'm going to issue debt to my investor. They're going to get a note, and that's going to convert to equity, okay, eventually. So the good news is that and it will convert. So if I'm doing a friends and family round now, I'm going to give them convertible debt. And then when I do my Series A round for when the venture capital comes in and does it, it's going to convert into the security that the new investor invests in at that price at a discount, because our friends and family around this round went in early, took more risk, so they should probably get a discount to the next round. So typically it's like a 20% discount, or what you negotiate. 20% is pretty standard. So it will convert at the next round at the new security, usually at a 20% discount or some discount. When I issued that note, the good news is I did not have to I did not value it, so that's good, right? It also will convert if there's a sale of the company. So if I sell the company, it will have the option to either convert or be paid, and so again, they get some upside from the sale of the company as well. So that's kind of a nice thing to do. So that's convertible debt. There is what would be say? What's an example of a new security? It would be a preferred stock would be most likely. So for example, if I do a Series A preferred stock, that would be the new security. Is the answer to the question. So go to the next slide if you would. Yeah, so a corollary to the convertible debt works almost exactly the same as something called a simple agreement for future equity, which is a safe, which you may or may not have heard of. And it works the same way, which is that it's converted into the security the next round at a discount. It's paid if there's a sale of the company, either paid or converted. It's paid if there's a dissolution of the company. Interestingly, it's not paid if you get the maturity date and there's no money. You actually don't. It's actually not a debt. You actually don't have to pay it back. So that's one of the odd things about a simple agreement for future equity. So it's actually a more attractive vehicle for the company not all investors will use these because exactly that is, there's actually no obligation to repay at maturity. So that's worth thinking about. But functionally, it does the same thing as a convertible debt. Okay, move on to the next round.
Sorry,
Next slide.
I'm still a little confused about the conversion. So if the debt is converted to equity, how is that determined? I guess.
Yeah. So if the let me just so for example, if I issue new securities, a new preferred stock at the Series A round and $2 a share, right? Or let's call it a dollar share. And I give the I had issued convertible debt. The convertible debt will convert at that round at a 20% discount or 80 cents a share. So it's going to get exactly the same security, exactly the same preferred stock, but at a lower value, at a lower cost. I'm sorry, lower cost.
Okay.
So they'll get essentially 20% more stock.
Okay. And the percentage is usually, I guess, discussed.
Yes. The discount? Yeah.
Yeah, the discount. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm using the 20%. Sometimes people get a little fancier and say, it depends on the timing. So for example, if I convert within a year, it's a 10%. If it's a year to 2 years, it's 20%. If it's after 2 years, it's 25%. Sometimes you do that because arguably the longer that it goes, the more risk there was, and the more sometimes I've seen it done that way. But more often than not anymore, I just see a straight 20% discount. It's actually become fairly standard.
Okay.
I want to spend one moment on the cap, one of my least favorite subjects. And the cap is that people who invest in convertible debt and safes have gotten smarter. And they've said, okay, yeah, but I want a cap on what this valuation is going to be to convert. So I don't want somebody to come in and give a real high valuation, and my investment, my convertible debt, my safes are going to convert at an unreasonably high value. So yes, I'm going to agree there's no valuation today, et cetera, but I'm going to cap the valuation for the conversion. And you negotiate what that is. Now that's a different, I want to distinguish, because it's really important when you have the discussion with investors. This is not the valuation today. So you're not talking about the valuation today. It is a cap on the valuation on the conversion and what it could be when you ultimately convert. So if your expectation is that it will have a $10 million valuation when you raise a Series A, then that's the cap you're negotiating. You're not negotiating the value today. You're negotiating the value, the conversion value at the time of the Series A. Really important distinction for you. So let me take 1 minute and give you an example of the cap. So in this example, if there's a $2 million investment, VC investment, and there's a $5 million pre-money valuation, and we did a $500,000 friend to family round, right? And there's a cap of a $2 million cap, right? Then if we did not have the cap, the friends and family would end up with 11% of the company after the $2 million investment. If they just got a 20% discount to the next round, and the next round had the next round was at a $5 million pre-money valuation, they would get, you'll see them, the friends and family, they'll get 11% of the company. If on the other hand, they agreed to a $2 million cap, and I made that up, then they got a 20% of the company as opposed to the 11%. Now notice the VC, they're going to get whatever they negotiated. So if they agreed on $2 million investment, the $5 million pre-money valuation, that equates to 29% of the company. That's just the way that math's going to work. So that whole 9% related to that cap is coming out of the founders. You see, they went from 60 to 51%, and the friends and family went from 11% to 20%. That comes out of the founders. So it's important if you're going to. I think the world has gone in a way that if you're going to do convertible debt and safes, it's likely that there'll be a cap. I've given up on trying to negotiate out caps, but it's really important to negotiate that cap as high as you possibly can and justify. Moving on. Next slide, please.
So you're saying that you should
Go
negotiate
ahead.
the cap to be as high as possible?
The cap, yes. Assuming you're the company, the issuer, not the investor. Yes. Okay. The investor wants the cap low. The company wants the cap high.
Can you go back to the previous slide just so I can?
Yep. Absolutely. I'll show that.
Okay, got it.
Cool. There'll be a quiz. Cool. All right. One more thing I wanted to make sure that it's clear, and this is not intuitive, but when you talk about the cap, it's important to remember to ask the question or think about whether or not the convertible debt or safe is included or excluded in that cap. All right, that's just a question. And when you think about this, and when you'll go back to the slide, and you'll think about this. But if you exclude for the company, okay, excluding the debt is better, right? Right. Make sure I got that right. Yeah. So it's important so you want it to be pre-money or exclude the debt, okay? In the cap. So let me go to the next slide and we'll do an example. So for example, if we had $1 million of safes or convertible debt and there were a $5 million cap, right? If it were based upon pre-money, which means does not include the safe would convert and get 16.67%. If, however, the safe is included in the cap, they get 20%. So we wouldn't need to go through the math here, but for what I want to make sure is you think about when you negotiate this, whether it's pre-money or post-money as it relates to the cap, whether it's included or excluded in the cap. Okay. Next slide. All right. So here's the good news. The good news is, I think that the convertible safe is easier. It's actually easier because you don't have to create all this preferred stock and go through. So it's actually an elegant solution to how to raise capital for growth companies. It's simpler. It avoids the valuation. I say sort of because you still have a cap issue, but that's as I've lectured, that's not the same as a valuation. The downside is that you don't know what the conversion is. You actually don't know how much equity you've given up because you don't know what that next valuation is going to be. So that's one of the unknowns for you. You actually don't know how much it's doing. It does usually accrue interest, which then gets converted. So there's that's creating additional dilution. Debt holders don't always have interests that are aligned with the common because their interest when you convert is to have the valuation low. Yours is for it to be high. So we got to be careful that they're not unduly influencing your next round because their interests are not the same as yours. They want a low valuation, so they get more equity when it converts. You want a high valuation, so it converts different. Go on to the next slide, please. And we already talked about this. Next slide, please. Next slide. I want to talk for one moment about the difference in the way this works. So and sort of an example. So if you do a priced round, and let's assume that the founder has 1 million shares, and those 100%, right? Go to the next slide. And we're going to issue some stock options, 15%. So now the 15%, which is, usually that's pretty customary, create an option pool of 15%. Next slide. And let's suppose we do a priced round. And we raised $250,000 from our friends and family, and it's a price round of $1 million pre-money valuation. So if you do a priced round, which means we're not doing convertible debt, we're actually issuing stock, whether it be preferred or common. Then if it's a $1 million pre-money valuation and they put $250,000, that means that the investors are getting 20% of the company. So you see that 20%. So that's fine. So they got 20% of the company, and you'll see that the founders and employees got diluted accordingly. Next slide. And then we do a Series A round. And let's suppose that we raised $2 million, $3 million pre-money valuation. That means the VC is getting 40%, and everybody got diluted accordingly. Okay, so you don't have to remember these numbers. Just that's the way it would work. You raise additional capital, everybody gets diluted accordingly. Next slide.
I'm just going to make a point here. Your lawyer should be doing this math for you. Get them to do it. And Dave kind of joked, the law students that if you went into law because you didn't want to deal with math, you have to get over it. So somebody should be doing the math and showing you what the difference is and what the before and after is going to look like.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good, let's pause there for a moment before I go through the rest of this, because what I'm doing is I'm going through an example of both the priced round, convertible debt, and then the risk of taking on too much debt. But in any of these, you should be doing pro forma cap charts that show you exactly different alternatives and what it would mean if you raise at different prices and different convertible debt, what different rounds and how much you would raise. And it should, so you have a pretty good idea what's doing it. And I half joke that the lawyers who went into law because they want to do math, get over it if you're going to do this kind of law, because you have to get into the math. But I will also say, with respect to the business people, don't leave it to the lawyers. This math is really important. You need to understand this. I understand that you are brilliant on the, and I have all the respect in the world for the technology and the business and the marketing and all that stuff. And you can give up huge gobs of your company without understanding it if you don't understand these numbers. And so, it's a little bit of the forest and the trees problem. You really should understand this stuff. And if your lawyer's not giving you cap charts or making you do the cap charts, or somebody's doing the Excel spreadsheets and working it out, somebody needs to do it and make sure you understand. Okay, cool. Thank you for the reminder, Kit.
Would this kind of need to be done prior to like a negotiation with people, I guess?
Yes, because otherwise you don't know what you're negotiating, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the tool you have in your back pocket, so you're ready for the negotiation, so you know what you're negotiating.
Got it.
Okay, so I did the price round. Let me just do the convertible debt round. So same example as the last one. Founder has 1 million shares, employees have 15%. Next slide, please. And go back one slide. Do we skip one? No, okay, next slide. That's good, sorry. All right, and then let's suppose that we did a convertible debt, a 20% discount. So we did we issued the $250,000 friends and family again, but rather than the price round, we gave them the convertible debt, which is 20% discount to the next round. Like the other example, we raised $2 million investment to $3 million pre-money valuation. All right, this is not particularly useful for you because you remember what the first slide was. So go to the next slide. And this is a summary of those two. The first one was a price round. The second was a convertible debt. You'll see that the friends and family ended up with, in the priced round, 12%, and the convertible debt only 6%. You'll see that 5% came largely from the founder and employees. Didn't touch the Series A. They took up the same 40%. But because we did convertible debt, so we ended up, because the convertible debt would have gone to a discount to the next round, and there was enough of an increase from what the price round would have been to the next round, I actually gave up to the convertible debt much less of the company, by virtue of using the convertible debt as opposed to a priced round. So it can really work to your benefit, which is part of the reason I'm suggesting convertible debt rather than try to negotiate a low valuation. Remember, one more point I should have made more explicit. Early money is expensive money because your valuation's lower. If I can push the valuation to later, based upon a later, arguably, if you're doing your job right, you have created value before then. And so if I can price it later when your company is worth more, then I'll give up less money. Again, early money is expensive money because there's more risk. Let's go to the next slide. I have seen people, I joke about convertible debt and say it's being painless because I'm not pricing it. So all I'm doing is issuing debt and someday it'll convert, but it's not showing as debt. There is such a thing as too much convertible debt because what you can end up doing is converting too much, giving the friends and family of the first round the convertible debt too much of the company, and you can end up in a not great situation. So for example, here is an example where they get $1 million convertible debt, 20% discount, et cetera, and the friends and family end up with 25% of the company. The founder, if not too much money, ends up at 30%. So that's pretty dilutive, and I've seen it much worse, where you basically end up with so much that you end up with not creating enough incentive for the founder and the employees, and you actually have to go back and renegotiate. So just be careful of that. Next slide. Yeah, and my example there, I mean, this does the same two, but again, that convertible debt, look how far down that the founder went down to 30%. Okay, next slide. A couple of the things that one negotiates with it. Oh, actually, I'm up against time, aren't I? I didn't realize. So other things you negotiate, I just want to touch on these. When investors talk about, I call it influence. They say, I want to be able to influence the company. What the hell does that mean? And I'll call it 3 layers of influence. One is the ability to, one is the ability to cause something to happen. One is to veto it, and another is to just have a vote. Those are 3 very different things. And when you're thinking about your company and what rights investors are coming, I want you to think about those 3 things. Are the investors negotiating to be able to cause something? For example, can they cause the company to be sold? Can they cause the company to be force me through drag along rights to sell the company? 2 is, can they veto it? So for example, can the investor say, I want to sell the company, and the investor can say no, and I can block the company from doing that. And I've had companies where they inadvertently did that, and that ended up being not a good place. Because remember, if you have to ask somebody, then it's not really, it's how much do I pay for the right? And the third one is just, do they have board representation but not control, just the right to at least be there and have a vote. Very different things. The principal ones that you talk about are rights to approve or have influence over future financing, fundamental transactions, employee equity. All right, move on. I'm going to skip these because I'm going to run out of time, but these are other things to talk about, which we can talk about another time. Next slide. Next slide. Top 10 mistakes. Let me just run through these real fast. 1, go. Overpromise, underdeliver. My experience with investors is it's really important just to call it as it is, right? Don't promise the moon. Tell people what you actually think it's going to be. I mentioned earlier, waste early money. Early money is expensive money. So when you raise capital, use it wisely, right? Try to use it in a strategic kind of way. My disrespect to capital is, I understand totally the investment and the time, et cetera. People are also putting their money in, and you've got to respect that. And that means telling people when things aren't going well, tell them why it's going well. Be honest and upfront with people, and be respectful of people's money. And I will tell you, it will get you through a huge number of issues with your investors. Communicate with your investors. To set up a system where you have meetings or you tell them, in part because it keeps them happy. Second is to get you through it when times are difficult. And third, your best source for additional capital down the road. So respect your investment. We already talked about targeting in the ladies. I basically already talked about the poisoning company. I already talked about leading the number of somebody else. Next slide. Next. And that's pretty much it. And I guess the last one is that I will suggest that, and I'm not suggesting us. There's lots of really great lawyers around town that do work with startup companies. One of the mistakes I do see is because it's less expensive, they hire Uncle Joe, who happens to be a lawyer, but unfortunately Uncle Joe does personal injury lawyers and personal injury, and I'm sure they're very good at what they do, but they don't know about this. So there is a specialty here, and there's, as I say, there's really good ones around town. So just use one of them and find one that you're comfortable with. And with that, I'll shut up. Questions?
So I have a question that's kind of maybe personal from my situation. For my startup, I kind of have maybe a few horizons or kind of levels that the company needs to reach first. So the first level is just showcasing the process, and I'm not trying to lose equity or give up equity for that. I'm trying to gain funding, but not give up equity. The next horizon may potentially be the scaling aspect of it, where it needs to be scaled massively. That's when I would consider giving up equity. What is your suggestion or strategy for getting funding for the first level while minimizing as much equity loss as possible?
Yeah, so it's not easy, right? So that's where I talk about the extent you can bootstrap or get customers to pay for something, that's helpful. Minimize your costs, which is, if you can get through it without being paid, or if your co-founder can do it without pay, so you absolutely minimize the cost during that, that's helpful. The extent you got to take some money, that's why yours is a perfect example of why I would be, if I had to raise capital from third parties, I would be doing convertible debt on the theory that when you do your next round, in order to do your commercialization, you're going to want to piggyback on the valuation there as opposed to the product risk of the first one. So I would do it. I would be lean and mean. See what I can do about bootstrapping. See what I can do about getting people to work inexpensively. Being lean and mean. See if I can get customers to pay, and then if I have to raise capital, do convertible debt or safes in the first instance.
I will just add one thing that we sort of stumbled on. Take a look for competitions.
Yeah.
One in town, for example, like Upprize. First prize is $150,000, and it's a check. No strings, no equity, no nothing. And that's not the only one. But we've had some really good luck with startups winning those too. So.
Yep.
They're called Uprise.
Called Upprize, yeah.
Great idea. Yes. Sorry, I should have said that. Absolutely. Cool.
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is a little bit irrelated from the content, but I'm just trying to see, how much does it cost for, having a contract with the KNL to incorporate a Delaware C Corp, and then what's the timeline look like?
For you, have I got a deal? No, I'm just joking.
Watch your pocket.
So the short answer is I don't know how many people. It depends on how many people you have, but forming a company actually is fairly can be done fairly quickly. We're talking about days, not weeks.
Okay.
And the cost can be fair. I mean, I don't want to give pricing on this call, so send me an email. I'll be happy to do it. But it would be a fixed price, and depending on sort of how many people and your situation, but it would not be exorbitant.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question.
Mhm.
How do we evaluate ESOP options for like early employees in the company?
So when you see ESOP options, what you're really talking about, I think, is employee stock option
Yeah.
plans, right? And so that's a great question, and it's sort of in part company specific. But I usually see people set aside options of 10 to 15% of the equity generally. And I tend to tell people not to use options. Don't give options to every single person. Again, I am maybe I'm cheap, and so I only give out options and equity to the extent it's necessary to attract or retain talent. If I'm paying a fair consideration to somebody and it's not going to motivate them, there's no reason to give it to them. And I know there are people that have a different view of the world, and so I get that. But I think that we need equity to drive people who are driven by it. So as I say, 10 to 15% is usually it. Make sure it gets vested over time so people don't get it immediately. So if they leave tomorrow, they don't walk away with stock, but it has to vest over time. But yeah, you usually see about 10 to 15% is the pool.